Jacob stood outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. His hands trembled as he stared at the divorce papers. They didn't feel real. 30 years of marriage reduced to a stack of cold, emotionless documents. Across the plaza, Laura walked briskly, her heels echoing against the concrete. Her tailored suit and confident stride made her look like a woman in charge of her destiny. But Jacob saw through the facade. Her freedom was a lie, a fantasy built on the ashes of their family. "Laura," he called, his voice breaking. She didn't stop. She didn't even glance back. For Jacob, time seemed to freeze. Memories of their life together came rushing in. The laughter, the fights, the nights they stayed up late planning their future. All of it had led to this moment. The woman he had once called his partner, his love, was now a stranger. But amidst the heartbreak, something shifted within him. The grief was still there, but now it burned with an edge of determination. "You'll regret this, Laura." 2 years earlier, Jacob and Laura had been the picture of stability. He was a successful architect, methodical and reliable. She was vibrant and compassionate, the glue that held their family together. They had built a beautiful home, raised 3 wonderful children, and celebrated countless milestones. But beneath the surface, Laura had begun to change. At first, Jacob noticed small things: her excitement about social causes, her growing circle of activist friends. It didn't bother him. If anything, he admired her passion. But admiration turned to concern as her interests consumed her. "You're spending a lot of time away," Jacob had said one evening as she prepared for yet another meeting. "These causes are important, Jacob," Laura replied, brushing off his concern. "You wouldn't understand." It was the first of many dismissals, each one leaving a tiny crack in their relationship. The night Laura returned from her solo trip, Jacob knew something was wrong. She walked through the door, her once long hair chopped into a sharp pixie cut. Her smile was gone, replaced by an unsettling calmness. "What's this?" Jacob asked, gesturing to her new look. She shrugged. "It's just hair. Don't overthink it." But Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. Her hair was a metaphor, a severing of ties, a shedding of their shared life. As weeks passed, Laura grew more distant. She stopped joining family dinners, opting instead for late-night gatherings with her friends. Her phone became a permanent fixture in her hand. Her laughter directed at text Jacob never saw. One night, she came home hours after midnight, smelling of wine and perfume. "Where were you?" Jacob demanded. "With friends," she said casually, avoiding his gaze. But Jacob wasn't convinced. He didn't know it then, but this moment marked the beginning of the end. Jacob's suspicions grew as Laura's behavior became more erratic. One evening, while scrolling through social media, he stumbled upon a photo that stopped him cold. Laura was in a dimly lit cafe, sitting across from a man he didn't recognize. They were laughing, their heads tilted toward each other in a way that felt too intimate. The caption read, "Rediscovering life, one moment at a time." Jacob's heart sank. The next day, he confronted her. "Who is he?" he asked, holding up his phone. Laura glanced at the screen inside, as if he were a child asking a foolish question. "He's just a friend, Jacob. Don't make this into something it's not." "A friend?" Jacob's voice rose. "You don't look at friends like that." Her silence was deafening. Days later, Laura packed her bags. "I can't do this anymore," she said, standing in their living room with a suitcase at her feet. Jacob stared at her, disbelief mingling with anger. "You're walking out on everything we've built?" "I'm walking toward myself," she replied, her tone resolute. The door closed behind her, and with it, the life Jacob had known. For weeks, Jacob wandered through the empty house, haunted by memories of a happier time. But his grief soon gave way to anger, a smoldering fury that refused to be ignored. If Laura wanted freedom, Jacob would give it to her, on his terms. He wasn't going to wallow and self-pity. He was going to rise, rebuild, and ensure she felt the weight of every choice she made. Jacob stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying his reflection. The man staring back at him looked worn, tired, haunted by betrayal. He ran a hand over his stubble and sighed. "No more," he muttered, grabbing his razor. That morning marked the first step of his transformation. He wasn't just shaving off a few days' growth. He was shedding the remnants of the man Laura had left behind. He joined a gym, his determination fueling grueling early morning workouts. His once slumped posture straightened. His stride regained purpose. The pain of Laura's departure still lingered, but it was no longer crippling. It was a fire pushing him forward. His children noticed the change almost immediately. Claire, his eldest, pulled him aside one evening. "Dad, you seem different," she said, a mixture of curiosity and admiration in her voice. Jacob smiled faintly, just trying to move on Claire, but moving on wasn't enough. Deep down, he wanted justice. Not for revenge alone, but for the years he had given to someone who had thrown them away so carelessly. Amelia entered Jacob's life unexpectedly. She was a vibrant, confident woman introduced by Claire during a family dinner. Her laughter was infectious, her energy magnetic. At first, Jacob was cautious. Amelia was younger, livelier, and unburdened by the scars of his past. But she didn't push him. Instead, she met him where he was, offering support without expectations. Their relationship grew organically. Together, they explored hiking trails and attended art exhibits, activities that reawakened Jacob's long-buried sense of wonder. One evening, as they watched the sunset from a hilltop, Amelia turned to him. "You're not just surviving, Jacob," she said softly. "You're living." For the first time in months, Jacob felt the truth of her words. Laura's new life wasn't what she had imagined. The thrilling whirlwind of activism and late-night dinners with her new circle of friends began to lose its charm. The man she had left Jacob for, a charismatic, younger activist, turned out to be unreliable, more interested in his image than in her. Her carefully curated social media posts started to shift. The confident captions gave way to cryptic messages about loneliness and regret. "I thought freedom meant happiness," she wrote in one post. "But what is freedom without love?" The likes and comments poured in, offering validation, but they felt hollow. She was losing control of the narrative, and it terrified her. Jacob received Laura's letter one crisp autumn morning. He sat at the kitchen table, Amelia's laughter echoing faintly from the living room, and read it twice. "I made mistakes, Jacob," the letter began. "But don't you think we owe it to each other to try again?" Jacob clenched the paper in his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. She didn't love him. She didn't even miss him. She missed the safety, the comfort of a life she had taken for granted. He didn't respond. Instead, he called his lawyer. Jacob's legal team uncovered a crucial oversight in Laura's financial claims. The settlement required her to adhere to specific conditions. Conditions she had blatantly ignored. With cold precision, Jacob filed the necessary paperwork to terminate her financial support. The message was clear. She couldn't have the best of both worlds. Laura's response came in the form of another social media video. Her face was pale, her voice trembling as she spoke directly to the camera. "Jacob's trying to punish me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He's turned everyone against me. I just wanted a chance to be happy." The video went viral, but not in the way Laura intended. Comments poured in, calling her selfish and applauding Jacob's resilience. "Actions have consequences." One comment read, Laura's final attempt to reconcile came weeks later. She arrived unannounced at Jacob's door. Her eyes red from crying. "Please, Jacob," she said, her voice breaking. "I need your help. I can't do this alone." Jacob studied her for a long moment. The woman standing before him was a shadow of the person he had once loved. "You made your choice, Laura," he said, his tone even. "Now you have to live with it." He closed the door, the final chapter of their story sealed shut. Jacob and Amelia stood together on a mountaintop, the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers. "This feels like a second chance," Jacob said, his hand entwined with hers. Amelia smiled. "That's because it is." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob felt a profound sense of peace. He had been through the fire and come out stronger. Laura's choice is no longer to find him. His story wasn't about loss. It was about triumph. Jacob decided he wasn't done yet, not entirely. He didn't just want to move on. He wanted to ensure that Laura understood the full weight of her actions. He began to highlight the life she had abandoned in subtle but cutting ways. On social media, he shared snapshots of moments she could have been a part of: a family barbecue, a surprise birthday party for Claire, a weekend retreat with his children and Amelia. Each post was carefully worded, cherishing the moments that truly matter. Jacob didn't engage in direct confrontation or bitterness. Instead, he allowed the images of his thriving life to speak volumes. He wanted her to see what she had chosen to leave behind. Not just him, but the family that had loved her unconditionally. Laura, as expected, saw the posts. Her once confident facade began to crumble in private. She called Jacob late one night, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "Doing what?" Jacob asked, his voice calm and measured. "This flaunting your life like everything's perfect," she snapped. "You're doing it to hurt me." Jacob paused and replied, "I'm not flaunting anything, Laura. I'm just living my life. Something you taught me to do." He hung up, leaving her in stunned silence. With her financial resources dwindling and her reputation tarnished by her own erratic behavior, Laura's social media posts became increasingly desperate. One evening, she posted a video filled with shaky, tearful confessions. "I thought I was strong," she said, her voice cracking. "But now I see how much I've lost. Jacob, the kids, everything. And he doesn't even care." The video was met with mixed reactions. While some sympathized with her, many criticized her for not owning her choices. "You can't expect to destroy a family and then play the victim," one comment read. Jacob didn't watch the video. He didn't need to. The fallout reached him anyway. Friends and acquaintances reached out to tell him about Laura's breakdown. Instead of responding, Jacob stayed silent. His silence was more powerful than any rebuttal. Jacob's children became his greatest source of strength during this time. They rallied around him, each expressing their pride in how he had handled the ordeal. "Dad, you didn't just survive this," Claire said during a quiet dinner. "You showed us what resilience looks like." The family bond grew stronger, with Amelia seamlessly integrating into their lives. She brought a warmth and stability that reminded Jacob of what love could be: selfless, supportive, and real. For Laura, the consequences of her actions were inescapable. The friends she had once prioritized over her family distanced themselves. Her new partner, the charismatic activist, had long since disappeared, leaving her truly alone. She moved to a smaller apartment on the outskirts of the city. Her vibrant social media presence reduced to sporadic posts about self-reflection. Each one reeked of loneliness. Months later, Laura reached out one final time. She requested to meet Jacob in person, claiming she needed closure. Reluctantly, he agreed, choosing a neutral cafe for their meeting. When she arrived, Jacob barely recognized her. The confident woman who had walked out of his life was now a shadow of herself. Tired, frail, and regretful. "I made mistakes, Jacob," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, you did," he replied, his tone firm, but not unkind. "I wish I could take it all back," she continued, tears welling in her eyes. Jacob leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "Laura, I don't hate you, but I don't forgive you either. You made your choices, and I've made mine. It's time for both of us to move on." As he walked away from the cafe, Jacob felt lighter than he had in years. He had given Laura the closure she sought, but more importantly, he had found his own. The story concludes with a celebration. A family dinner hosted by Jacob and Amelia. Surrounded by his children, their laughter filling the air. Jacob felt a profound sense of gratitude. Amelia raised her glass for a toast. To second chances and a strength to embrace them, Jacob smiled his heart full. For the first time in a long time, he looked to the future with hope, knowing that the scars of the past no longer defined him.